In this tricky topic, we'll explore the importance of heuristics in decision-making. The average human makes countless decisions every day, and most of these happen without our notice. Each decision we make involves processing information as efficiently as possible, so we can free up our minds to do the next thing. Decision-making is all about problem-solving, which sometimes we do very well, and other times really poorly because we rely on certain strategies that lead to mistakes. There are many different problem-solving strategies available to us, so let's look at some common ones. An algorithm is a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem. They're powerful because they're thorough, and so are designed to generate the best answer. Computers, with their massive processing speeds, use software algorithms a lot. A downside for humans is that they're time-consuming, so we don't use them as much. We sometimes arrive at sudden solutions in a flash, referred to as a eureka insight, which is the word Greek mathematician Archimedes shouted when he realized the principle of volume displacement while taking a bath. These flashes of insight are unpredictable, so aren't really reliable tools in our day-to-day problem solving. We're much more likely to use mental shortcuts called heuristics. Let's look at an example. What word can you make from these 8 letters? Take a minute to see if you can unscramble it. Pause the video if you like. Did you get it? In fact, there are over 40,000 ways to rearrange these letters, so using an algorithm to check every single one against an English dictionary would take forever for a slow human brain. One way to try and solve this problem is to apply some shortcuts, like placing the S at the end, since this is how we form plurals in English. Also, most words start with consonants rather than vowels, so you can quickly eliminate quite a few of those 40,000 possibilities by ignoring the combinations that start with vowels. Eventually, you're likely to come up with the answer. It's easy to see from this simple example how we use heuristics for these types of problems, but it wasn't until recently that our reliance on these mental shortcuts became widely accepted. For most of the 20th century, rational choice theory was the prevailing view of psychologists, economists, and others who studied decision-making. This is the idea that humans make rational choices to best reach their goals. At the time, most experts believed that decision-making was based on a cost-benefit analysis, weighing the costs associated with a course of action with the predicted rewards. However, in the early 1970s, 2 psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, challenged rational choice theory. They felt that people make all sorts of non-rational decisions, and demonstrated this with some simple studies. In one experiment, participants heard 39 names, 19 famous women and 20 non-famous men. Then they were asked which gender they heard more frequently. Most people, 80% in fact, claimed that they had heard more female names, presumably because the famous names were more memorable. This tendency to solve problems based upon how easily we can pull information into our awareness is called the availability heuristic, and it's something that we use all the time. Let's say that you're late for class, and you can see up ahead that the crosswalk light is telling you to stay put. What do? Your brain might quickly recall times when you've jaywalked in the past and nothing happened, so you decide to charge on ahead. Or you might remember that there were a number of crosswalk accidents recently and decide to play it safe and stay put. Either way, we make these quick decisions all the time, based upon the information that is available to us. So what influences whether we use this mental shortcut? One source of availability is vividness, or in other words, if I can imagine it, it must exist. In one study, people were asked to estimate the likelihood of dying from various causes, and most people said that death from a tornado was much more likely than dying from asthma. In fact, this is totally wrong. Asthma kills many more people, but tornadoes are dramatic events and are much more easily called to mind. Now, another source of availability is our recent experiences. In fact, the events in our lives strongly color how we see the world. Sometimes we make incorrect judgments about things that have received a lot of media attention. In other words, if everyone is talking about it, it must be everywhere. For instance, leading up to the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio, there was a lot of news coverage of the risk of contracting mosquito-borne Zika virus, which has been linked to birth defects in newborns. Sales of mosquito repellents rose dramatically, even in areas where the risk was very low or essentially non-existent. So according to Kahneman and Tversky, we have a tendency to rely on this way of thinking when we're uncertain. But what about situations where we have solid information to help us solve a problem? Let's say we have a container with 20 red chips and 80 white chips. If you put your hand in and pulled out a chip at random, how likely is it that you'll get a white one? Most people correctly answer 80%. What about the chances of getting a red chip? Again, most people would correctly answer 20. But let's make this a little bit more interesting. Let's say we have a container with 20 lawyers and 80 engineers. Don't worry about how they got in there, it's a big bucket. Again, if you put your hand in and pulled out a person at random, how likely is it that you'll get an engineer? Most people correctly answer 80%. What about the chance of getting a lawyer? Again, most people would correctly answer 20. But the interesting thing is that people throw this logic out the window if they're first given a personality description. So, if instead I told you that we randomly pulled someone out of this collection of 100 people, and by the way, this person likes to argue, is very good at debating, and is considering a career in politics, would this change your estimate? Think about it for a second. Do you feel like the odds now are more than 20%? Most people, when given this personality description, say it's more likely that this person is a lawyer, since it fits the common stereotype of a lawyer. However, the odds have not changed. The likelihood remains at 20%. This type of mental shortcut is known as the representativeness heuristic, where we estimate the probability of an event based on how typical it is of another event. Because we think of certain occupations as having representative behaviors, it can lead us to ignore other information. Because debating and politics are common interests for many lawyers, it skews the assessment of our random draw from the group. Now, these are just two examples of heuristics. Because they save us time, they can sometimes be handy, but they also come at a cost of making mistakes.